March 24, 2023. The courtroom became utterly still as 16-year-old Aiden Fucci stood before Judge Arl Smith, waiting for the sentence that would determine the rest of his existence. This was not a routine judgment. This was the moment a teenager, whose actions horrified an entire nation, was handed what many believe is a punishment more devastating than death itself. Life in prison, with eligibility for review after 25 years. To the outside world, that may sound like compassion. It isn't. Because that chance is not mercy, it is mental torment. It is the act of placing hope just close enough to see, while knowing it will almost certainly never be reached. And the conditions Fucci now endures behind bars are so relentless and unforgiving that many inmates openly say they would prefer the certainty of execution over decades trapped in this reality. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn will fundamentally challenge how you think about life imprisonment versus the death penalty. And here's the most startling detail. This case is once again dominating headlines in December 2025, and what Fucci is experiencing right now inside prison confirms everything I'm about to explain. Judge Arl Smith did not soften his language during sentencing. He described Fucci's crime as one of the most disturbing and difficult cases he had encountered throughout his judicial career. And once the facts are fully understood, it becomes painfully clear why. During Mother's Day weekend in 2021, 14-year-old Aiden Fucci convinced his 13-year-old classmate and friend, Tristan Bailey, to walk with him into the woods near their neighborhood in St. Johns County, Florida. What followed is almost impossible to comprehend. Tristan Bailey was stabbed 114 times. Pause on that number. 114. The medical examiner documented 49 defensive wounds, proof that this young girl fought desperately to survive as Fucci continued the attack again and again. This was not sudden rage. This was not an accident. This was sustained, intentional violence that did not stop. What makes this case even more chilling is the absence of motive. Judge Smith made this unmistakably clear. This was not driven by money, not by jealousy, not by revenge, not by rejection. There was no argument, no provocation, no emotional trigger. Fucci murdered Tristan Bailey for one reason alone. He wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone and watch them die. Let that sink in. A 14-year-old boy took the life of a 13-year-old girl purely to satisfy his curiosity about death. The judge stated that Fucci's behavior was so abnormal for someone his age that the likelihood of genuine rehabilitation was extremely low. That single statement sealed Fucci's future in a way most people never fully appreciate. Being sentenced to life as a teenager doesn't just take away freedom, it erases identity. It eliminates the possibility of a future. No graduation, no career, no independence, no adult relationships, no family, no dreams. Every milestone other young people expect as part of growing up simply disappears. All that remains is steel, concrete, and an endless stretch of time with no purpose beyond survival. And this is where the story grows even darker. In January 2025, Fucci was transferred from Shawnee Correctional Institution, where he had been housed since sentencing. First, he was moved to the Reception and Medical Center West Unit in Lake Butler. Then, only weeks later in late January, he was transferred again, this time to Cross City Correctional Institution in Dixie County. The Florida Department of Corrections describes these transfers as routine. But nothing about Fucci's incarceration is routine. Reports indicate he was involved in a physical altercation at Shawnee in June 2023. While officials insist the move was not disciplinary, the timing raises serious questions. So what is really happening to Fucci behind bars? What does he face every single day that makes this punishment feel worse than death? Cross City Correctional Institution is not a mild facility. It opened in 1972 on the grounds of a former Air Force base. Think about that symbolism. A place once designed to train protectors of freedom now serves as a containment zone for society's most dangerous offenders. The prison houses over 1,800 adult male inmates across multiple security levels. For someone like Fucci, this means daily existence among murderers, armed robbers, and hardened criminals who have spent decades inside prison walls. And this is where the reality becomes unbearable. Every morning begins the same way. 5:30 a.m. Fluorescent lights explode on without warning. No alarm clock. No snooze button. No choice. Just another identical day beginning, one of thousands more exactly like it. At 6 a.m., breakfast is pushed through a slot in the cell door, powdered eggs, watery oatmeal, and lukewarm coffee that barely resembles anything from the outside world. For a teenager who once chose his meals freely, every bite is a reminder of total dependence. He eats what he's given, when he's told. Contact with the outside world is tightly controlled, creating its own form of psychological suffocation. Phone calls are monitored and limited to 2 free 5-minute calls per month. Every word spoken to family is recorded. Paid calls may last longer, but privacy does not exist. There are no incoming calls, no spontaneous conversations, no personal space. Visiting rules deepen the isolation. Anyone over 12 must submit an application that can take up to 30 days to approve. Visits occur only by appointment, only on weekends or holidays, and only under constant surveillance. These are not family moments. They are reminders that Fucci belongs to the state. What makes Fucci's situation especially devastating is what's happening outside those walls. His former classmates are graduating, starting careers, forming relationships, building families, living real lives. Fucci wakes up to the same concrete ceiling every day. He is frozen in time while the world continues without him. Social media posts, news headlines, and rare visits don't comfort him. They torment him, highlighting everything he will never experience. And then comes the cruelest irony of all. That 25-year sentence review doesn't soften the punishment, it intensifies it. Unlike inmates with no possibility of release, Fucci must live with a constant mental battle between hope and despair. He must maintain flawless behavior for decades. Complete programs. Show remorse. Demonstrate growth. All while knowing the same judge who sentenced him openly questioned whether meaningful change was even possible. When that review arrives, Fucci will be 39 years old. And the reality is obvious. The chance of freedom is nearly non-existent. But even worse than the physical conditions is the psychological damage of being a young, infamous offender in an adult prison. And that is where this punishment becomes truly devastating. Correctional officers and inmates alike quickly identify young offenders like Fucci, and once that happens, their experience behind bars often becomes far more severe than that of older prisoners. Within prison culture, there is a deep and particular hatred for individuals who commit violent crimes. Fucci's case was covered extensively by national media, and the details of his crime are widely known throughout the prison. That notoriety turns him into a constant target. Inmates looking to establish dominance see him as an opportunity. Officers who view his actions with revulsion may treat him with little patience or empathy. Together, these forces create an environment where danger is ever present. That altercation at Sani Correctional Institution in June 2023 was not an isolated incident. It was a preview of what his daily life has become: constant alertness, constant tension, and the unshakable awareness that violence could erupt at any moment. Life at Cross City Correctional Institution steadily erodes mental stability through strict control and endless repetition. Even recreation time becomes a cruel mockery of freedom. For 1 hour a day, Fucci is allowed into an outdoor yard made entirely of concrete, enclosed by razor wire and watched from guard towers. The sky above may be open, but it is framed by barriers that exist solely to remind him that this freedom is temporary and tightly regulated. While other people his age are driving cars, traveling, going to beaches, and discovering the world, Fucci walks slow circles in a fenced box, counting down the minutes until he is locked back inside his cell. Mental health professionals who study long-term incarceration warn that young offenders face unique and severe risks. The human brain continues developing into the mid-20s, and prolonged confinement during these formative years can result in irreversible psychological harm. Depression, chronic anxiety, emotional detachment, and even psychosis become increasingly likely when normal social development is completely interrupted. Fucci's personality is no longer shaped by school, friendships, or life experiences. It is being molded by isolation, routine, and confinement. He is becoming institutionalized. His sense of self is being rebuilt entirely around the prison system. By the time he reaches his 25-year sentence review, he will have spent more of his life incarcerated than free. The mail Fucci receives paints a grim picture of how the outside world perceives him. Unlike high-profile inmates who receive fan letters or words of support, most correspondence addressed to Fucci is filled with anger, hatred, and disgust. Strangers from across the country write to remind him of his crime, often describing in graphic detail what they believe he deserves. Each letter adds another layer to the psychological weight he carries, reinforcing his isolation and shame. Sleep becomes increasingly difficult for young inmates serving life sentences. While other teenagers worry about exams, relationships, or college applications, Fucci lies awake staring into the darkness, thinking about decades of identical days stretching endlessly into the future. The darkness of his cell offers no peace. It is filled with the certainty that tomorrow will look exactly like today, and that the same routine will repeat for the next 50 or 60 years. The appeals process offered its own form of cruel hope. Fucci's legal team challenged his sentence, but in March 2025, the 5th District Court of Appeal upheld the original ruling. The only change was the correction of a minor clerical issue involving a public defender fee, reduced from $100 to $50. For someone clinging to even the smallest chance of change, this hollow victory meant nothing. The life sentence remained untouched. Every denied appeal reinforces the same message: this reality is permanent. Every ruling is another door closing, another reminder that there is no escape. Now consider what the next 25 years truly look like for Aiden Fucci. He is currently 18 years old. When he becomes eligible for sentence review, he will be 39. That means 21 more years of waking up at 5:30 a.m. under harsh fluorescent lights. 21 more years of eating whatever food slides through a slot in his door. 21 more years of monitored phone calls and supervised visits. 21 more years of pacing a concrete yard. 21 more years of sleeping in a locked cell. 21 more years of being told when to wake, when to eat, when to move, and when to sleep. Think about how much life unfolds in 21 years. Fucci will lose his entire 20s and most of his 30s, the years when most people discover who they are, build careers, form relationships, travel, start families, and create memories. All of that is gone. And even if, against all odds, the review board granted his release at 39, he would emerge into a world he barely recognizes. Technology would have advanced. Society would have changed. Everyone he once knew would have moved forward without him. He would have no work history, no meaningful education outside limited prison programs, and no support system beyond the justice system itself. But here is the reality few people are willing to face. That review will almost certainly not result in release. Not for someone who committed such an extreme act of violence at such a young age. Not for someone whose sole motivation was curiosity about killing. The most likely outcome is that Fucci will die in prison. Whether at 50, 60, or 70, his entire adult life will be spent behind bars. This brings us to the uncomfortable debate many try to avoid. People often argue that life imprisonment is more humane than the death penalty. They say execution is too easy, that offenders should suffer for their crimes, that death is an escape. But after examining Fucci's existence, the question becomes unavoidable. Which punishment is truly worse? A single execution after years of appeals, or 5 or 6 decades of this grinding, controlled, joyless existence? Waking up every day knowing you will die in the same place. Aging inside a cell. Watching the world move on through fragments and memories. Never experiencing freedom. Never having privacy. Never making a real decision about your own life. Some call the death penalty cruel and unusual punishment. But what about this? What about condemning a 14-year-old to spend the rest of his natural life in a concrete box? Is that not cruel? Is that not unusual? This is not about sympathy. What Fucci did to Tristan Bailey was unspeakably horrific. He stole her future in the most brutal way imaginable. Her family will never see her graduate, marry, or have children. That loss is permanent. The question is not whether Fucci deserves punishment. He does. The question is whether this specific punishment, this decades-long psychological destruction disguised as mercy because it is not death, is truly justice. Or is it something else entirely? What we know for certain is this. As of December 2025, Aiden Fucci remains incarcerated at Cross City Correctional Institution, serving a life sentence for the murder of Tristan Bailey. His appeal has failed. His transfer suggests ongoing difficulties behind bars. The reality of his situation is sinking in more deeply with each passing day. At minimum, he has 21 more years before even the possibility of review, and that possibility may be nothing more than an illusion. This is his life now. Concrete. Steel. Endless repetition. Until death finally comes. So I ask you to consider this and share your thoughts. After understanding what life imprisonment truly looks like, day after day, year after year, do you still believe it is more humane than the death penalty? Or have we simply created a way to make people suffer for decades while calling it justice? When you strip away the labels and examine the reality, you may find the answer is far more disturbing than you expected.